Life Reflection, Chapter 19, The Pandemic. So for this life reflection, I want to go over a period of time in my late 20s where I feel like a year and a half was basically taken away from me. Taken away from everyone, I'd say. And for some, this could have been a year and a half longer. I'm not sure. It depends on where you live, what regulations you had, and whether or not you got access to like a vaccine or something similar sooner or later. So for me, we can just talk about like what happened along the way, or from the beginning and then along the way. So initially, we planned on actually going to Singapore that year of 2020. We were talking to a friend. We even bought flights to Singapore, and it was going to be our first time there, and we were going to visit our friend from college, our good friend. And unfortunately, the pandemic happened, and once we found out about it, everyone was kind of like unsure about what to do. The flight was basically canceled, and they gave me like a refund or like credit to use in the future. So at least I didn't have to like eat the cost of paying for a flight to a place where I would not be able to go because of restrictions. And I'm not really here to talk about the politics of it. I think the experience for basically everyone was pretty negative. It was a pretty unprecedented time where we basically had no choice but to not make contact with other people, or at least we were told not to. And it was heavily, regarded as really bad if you went out and got close to other people and all that stuff. Everyone knows because we all experienced it, so I don't have to describe it. But my personal experience with it was overall negative because of the fact that I had to limit my time with, I guess, friends. In general, I just didn't see friends. I didn't go out. I basically just stayed home all the time. And that led to a lot of, I'd say, primarily like mentally psychological issues, mostly dealing with like loneliness and not really feeling like I was actually living, Some of the things that kept me going around that time was just like me having online calls with friends. We recorded stuff for YouTube for one of our channels a lot, did a lot of like virtual content basically, where we would use Zoom to be on a meeting and talk about our favorite shows and stuff like that. So I remember doing that quite a lot, and that was one of the fun things during that time. And there was another thing that was nice as well, where I met friends online who did some D&D things like Dungeons and Dragons. And this would lead to meeting some new friends eventually in person once the pandemic restrictions were over. But in the meantime, we did some sessions like online, and I thought they were really, really fun. Like, he was a very, very good DM, a good dungeon master, a good host for the games. And we did one-shots basically. So one-shots are where the DM comes up with a scenario or story that is done all at once, usually around 3 hours average. So it's pretty doable if you have the time, especially when you're stuck at home, not able to do much. So that was a phase where I did that quite a lot. I'd say I did it at least 6 times total. To me, that's quite a lot. Just because that's not something I normally do. I'd say that ironically, like around that time was a phase where I was productive, but not productive in a way that I would like. I think we were able to produce a good amount of videos and stuff like that, but I didn't have the sort of level of mindfulness and lucidity that I do now. Arguably, in general, my whole life, I haven't had this level of lucidity just because I've really been connected with myself recently. But overall, that time period in general was like very, very foggy, very hazy, very like just in my own head, but also not really like in my head, just sort of in this limbo zone. I'm looking back at my journal right now because I feel like I want to get a better sense of like what I did around that time. And a lot of it is saying like hellish editing as the titles, a lot of editing, a lot of video creation, some reading manga, a lot of calls with friends, some calls with friends that we haven't seen in a long time as well, or heard from. More manga. This is also around the time that I was playing this game that was pretty distracting. It was called Arknights. I think I only played it for like 2 months, but some anime watching, some freelance projects, reading a book, reading the Kyoshi book, watching a lot of movies. And also around this time, I had some YouTube calls that were with Jump Cut, and they were just basically coaching me for YouTube and stuff like that. I feel like I didn't really make too much use of it, unfortunately. Watching more anime, Hunter x Hunter, more catching up with friends. I mentioned programming at work. It's our first birthday in quarantine as well, where we didn't actually host an event, which is unfortunate. But I said that it was okay. And around this time, like, I still saw family, obviously. So whenever we got the chance, that was nice. And it was just like family that basically lived right next to us. And this was also around the time, I guess, I created the whiteboard animation course. Not the video that blew up on YouTube, but a course itself to teach people how to do that type of video. I think this was around the time I tried to start like my first version of the podcast. And obviously there's like a lot of podcasts I tried starting and it never quite worked out. I think this might be the only podcast I'm probably going to continue to do for a very long time. Just because every other podcast, I always try to involve other people or having people on. And I feel like for me, I guess that's really difficult to be consistent with. This was also around the time that we were trying to deal with our acne. Like, we made a video on our personal channel about acne and how I used Accutane and everything like that. And it was definitely a really trying time for me mentally because, yeah, I had pretty bad acne around that time. But once the restrictions started to relax, we definitely did a whole lot more stuff. We got involved in more like filmmaking stuff as well, which was really fun. Like there's this one trip in Big Bear where I mentioned it, I think, where we were working BTS and we just had such a great time, basically. Like, I remember us doing some filming stuff. We were all friends as well beforehand, or not all of us, but some of us. And after we had a fun day of filming, we went back to the place that we stayed at and just watched like the footage we took, and they watched some of my behind the scenes footage as well. And I remember there was this one shot that was difficult to do because it was like an action shot, and they were racking some focus, and it was kind of like a fast racking focus that they had to do. And my camera for the BTS has autofocus, while their camera is a manual focus camera, the Blackmagic one. And we were laughing really hard because for my BTS, I happened to capture, like, the focus happened to do exactly what the director wanted on its own. And they couldn't quite get it right the first few takes. So when they watched it, like, all of us just bursted out in laughter. And I don't know, it was I guess it wasn't that funny, right? In telling this story and saying it out loud, it doesn't sound that funny, but for whatever reason, the 3 of us or 4 of us watching that clip, having been there, having done what we did in our context, we just like found it so funny. It was like, yeah, I don't remember laughing that hard or like in a while, because it was like right after COVID restrictions were lifted and stuff, and it was just like a great moment to be around people again and all that stuff. But I did meet like a few friends, like I said, thanks to the online activities. So after the restrictions ended, we met up in person because the Dungeons and Dragons guy had like a real life party, and that's where I met some new friends and everything. But overall, I do really feel like it was a year that was at least a year that was taken away, because I had a lot of plans that involved creating content with other people around that time, like before it happened. And I think that it made me basically lose the momentum and steam for actually making it happen. Not to use it as an excuse or anything, but I do feel like, I guess, older than I should be. I feel like there was a year where I just couldn't do what I wanted to do. And that definitely sucks. And I know a lot of people also feel similar. So I at least wanted to mention that as part of the journey in my late 20s, like my pretty much early, I guess mid 20s, but I guess right now what I'm considering early 20s is 21 to 24, and then mid 20s is 25 to 26, I guess. And then late 20s is 27, right? And on. I never even thought about it. I kind of just thought of it as 25 and beyond is late 20s, but that doesn't make sense. That's mid 20s. So yeah, I guess that's a mid 20s type of thing for me. Like my mid 20s basically got obliterated because of the pandemic. And I feel like that's a really prime year. Like I think in general 20s is a good time, and then people say that 30s is going to be even better. I mean, I'll find out soon enough, but I really do feel like time and everything, opportunities were just lost around that time. Although I will say that there were certainly some other opportunities as well. Like I feel like certain things with YouTube were increased because of it. Like a lot more people were watching YouTube. So it was a little bit easier to actually get more views and all that stuff. Not that it really mattered that much, and not that we took advantage of that at all. We kind of just kept doing the same stuff. I think that, it was what it was. There's no point in looking back at this point, but I mean, this is a life reflection and it's part of my life. So, but overall, I feel like other than losing those years, like I managed it well enough. It wasn't like a super upsetting for me, and I felt like I coped well enough. I thought this was definitely going to be a longer episode, but I guess we'll just leave it at that.